I've never been the type to believe in ancient stories, let alone legends about fallen angels and giants. But what happened to me that night changed everything. It was a simple trip, just me and two friends exploring a little-known archaeological site, a place that, according to local residents, was forbidden after dusk. Of course, we laughed about it at the time. But when the sun set and darkness took over the valley, I started to feel something different. The air grew heavy, as if an invisible presence were watching us. The warm breeze that had accompanied us all day vanished, replaced by a strange, damp cold. My friends noticed it too. We stood there, frozen, trying to rationalize what we were feeling until we heard it. First, a distant sound, like whispers carried by the wind. Then footsteps, but not our own. I wanted to believe it was some animal or just the wind rustling the leaves, but there were no trees there. Only ancient stones and remnants of a civilization that no one could explain. My heart raced when I realized the footsteps were getting closer, and then it happened. The moon, previously hidden by clouds, illuminated the slope before us, and for a second, I saw something my brain refused to process. A colossal shadow, too tall to be human, moved among the ruins. But it wasn't just its height that frightened me. It was its shape. It didn't walk like a man. Its limbs seemed disproportionate, as if made for something other than walking on earth. And when it turned its face toward me, I knew. Even without understanding how, I knew exactly what I was looking at. I tried to swallow the panic growing inside me, but my body wouldn't respond. I wanted to run, to scream, anything, but I stayed there, paralyzed. My friends saw it too. One of them muttered under his breath, while the other stepped back, almost stumbling over the stones. The silence was absolute. Not even the crickets dared to chirp. Then that being moved and the ground seemed to vibrate under its feet. It wasn't alone. Other shadows emerged among the ruins, some even larger. I can't say whether it was real or if our minds were playing tricks on us, but at that moment, it seemed we were facing something that should no longer exist. My instinct screamed at me to run, but something inside me wanted to understand what was happening. There was something profoundly wrong about their presence, as if time itself were displaced. They weren't just shadows or vague figures. They were tangible, solid creatures with defined muscles and a bearing that suggested intelligence. They were not mere beasts. They were something older, something that shouldn't be there. One of them raised its head, and for an instant I swear I saw eyes that shone, reflecting the moonlight like those of a predator. That's when reality hit me. We were not alone there. And worse, they knew we were there. I didn't wait any longer. I turned to run, but my feet felt stuck to the ground. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. One of my friends whispered my name, but I couldn't respond. Then a sound cut through the silence, a deep noise like a muffled thunder coming from the ground. The air around us grew denser, as if an invisible force were pressing down on our bodies. I didn't want to look again, but my eyes were drawn to those creatures. One of them, the largest, raised an arm toward us. It didn't speak, but I felt something inside me, a sense of intrusion, as if something were probing my mind, sifting through my thoughts. And then, a word formed in my head, but it wasn't mine. Nephilim. It was like an echo inside my skull, a voiceless sound, but laden with meaning. I don't know how, but I understood. It wasn't just a vision or a daydream. We were facing something that existed millennia ago and somehow was still there. I don't know how much time passed, but when I finally managed to move, I grabbed my friends by the arm and bolted toward the exit of the valley. We ran without looking back, hearing the echoes of footsteps behind us. Were they real or just our imagination? I don't know. But what I do know is that when we finally reached the car, one of my friends vomited from nerves. The other trembled so much he couldn't open the door, and I could only think of one thing. If that thing still existed, what else was hidden from the world? On the way back, no one said a word. The silence in the car was suffocating, but it wasn't just fear that kept us quiet. It was the certainty that we had seen something we shouldn't have. My thoughts were in disarray. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the mind, an illusion caused by the gloomy setting and the stories we had heard before going there. But it wasn't that simple. The feeling of being watched still clung to me. It was as if something had latched onto my soul, as if we had awakened something that had been dormant for centuries. When we finally reached the city, we got out of the car as if we were emerging from a nightmare. My friend who had vomited was still pale, his eyes wide with shock. The other lit a cigarette with trembling hands, saying nothing. I just wanted to go home, lock the door, and pretend none of that had happened. But when I grabbed my cell phone, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The screen was lit up, showing a missed call. The number was unknown. And the strangest part? The call had come in while we were at that damned ruin. My heart raced. I don't recall hearing the phone ring, and there was no signal where we were. I hesitated for a moment before pressing the call return button, but the call wouldn't connect. Number non-existent. My friends noticed my expression and asked what had happened. I showed them the screen. The silence in the car grew even heavier. It wasn't possible. How could someone have called us at that place, at that time? Worst of all, deep inside my soul, I felt it wasn't a coincidence. That night was long. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those beings among the ruins. I felt that suffocating presence around me. And then, at 3:33 in the early morning, I woke with a start. The room was dark, but something felt off. There was a weight in the air, a sensation that I wasn't alone. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I swear, I saw a shadow in the corner of the room, a motionless silhouette just watching me. I blinked, and it disappeared, but the feeling that something had followed me from that ruin never went away. The following days were torment. My friends weren't well either. One of them started having recurring nightmares, always with those gigantic shadows watching them. The other began to hear strange sounds at night, footsteps in the hallway of his house, whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls. I tried to ignore it, to go on with life as normal, but it was impossible. The lights flickered whenever I passed by, my dog started growling at nothing, and every time I looked at, my reflection in the mirror for too long, I felt that something was wrong, as if something else were staring back at me. The last straw came when I decided to research that place further. I joined obscure internet forums in groups discussing ancient civilizations and forgotten myths. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. An old account, lost among comments on a forum deactivated years ago. The text spoke of an archaeological site where gigantic shadows were seen after dusk. The post's author said that it wasn't just a legend, it was a warning. And the last sentence kept echoing in my mind. If you saw them, they saw you, and they do not forget. After reading that, I felt a chill down my spine like never before. Everything made sense. It wasn't just a vision, it wasn't just a legend. Those things were there, waiting, and we disturbed them. My friends tried to move on, to pretend nothing had happened, but I knew something changed after that night. Small events began to accumulate. One of my friends distanced himself from everyone and moved to another city without explanation. The other developed a strange paranoia, putting salt on doors and windows, saying he needed to prevent something from coming in. As for me, I just try not to think too much about it. But sometimes, I have no choice. A few weeks later, I woke up in the middle of the night again, at the same time as always, 3:33. This time, there were no shadows in the room, but my cell phone was on. New missed call from the same unknown number of that night. But this time, there was a voicemail. My hands trembled as I pressed play. The audio lasted only a few seconds. A low, distorted sound, as if coming from a very distant place. Amid the static, a single word emerged, an almost imperceptible whisper, but one that I recognized immediately. Nephilim. At that moment, my whole body turned cold. I felt a weight on my chest, as if something invisible were pressing me against the bed. My ears were ringing, and for a second I was sure I wasn't alone in the room. But when I blinked, everything went back to normal. The cell phone was still in my hand. The message still there. I should have deleted it, forgotten all of it. But something inside me wouldn't let me. So I did what any sensible person would never do. I returned the call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, someone answered, but there was no one on the other end. Only breathing, slow, deep. And then the call ended. After that, I never received another call, but the feeling never went away. Some nights, I still wake at 3:33 for no apparent reason. Sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary day, I feel that same sensation of being watched. I know it might sound like paranoia, but something inside me tells me that night was only the beginning.